Hey everybody, Tony D and Little Joan here. We're going to do a hot take. Hot take about, let's call it liberty in the age of the beer virus. Things are starting to get a little dicey out there. And I am reminded of a recent tweet. Here, I'm going to put Joan down. There was a tweet done by, I don't know who, I forget, but it was a picture of a guy protesting the lockdowns in Ohio, and his sign said, "Let's quarantine sick people. Let's quarantine sick people, not the Constitution," which I thought was a fair point. However, he was dressed as Guy Fawkes, and instead of the mask, he put on makeup, so he looked a little weird. But the guys on Twitter were making fun of him. Look at this guy. Yeah, he should be in quarantine. A lot of them were comic book guys because, a lot of my Twitter mutual followers are comic book guys. And just like all the other realms of entertainment, most of the comic book guys lean pretty hard left. And I was a little surprised these guys would make fun of this dude, or at least his sign, or at least the concept. They're not going to be making fun of him in a couple of weeks because more of these stories are going to come out. Another thing that happened was going around the internet, I'm getting the letter that says the president's going to lock down the country in 48 to 72 hours. The National Guard's coming out to guard all the stores, and then the announcement's going to happen after they lock it all down. I got that initially two weeks ago off of Facebook from someone, and then I got it again. Yeah, that's not happening. I assume that's some sort of fake letter somebody put together because they thought it would happen. But it's not happening because obviously Trump would throw away his chances of re-election, and all the "he's a dictator" memes would suddenly come true if he actually initiated the Stafford Act, which I think is the wrong act. Might not be. He's sort of using the part of the act in order to make these respirators and things. But my understanding is I think it's a different act. But regardless, he's not. He's been pretty adamant that he's not going to initiate any kind of federal martial law because he understands, quite simply, the beer virus is hitting the country in different places at different times. So to lock down the whole country would be stupid because you'd be locking down places like West Virginia that only have a handful of cases right now. They just got a few cases not too long ago. Places like Wyoming and Montana and Idaho, where it's so sparsely populated, they don't really need to lock down the whole state. They just need to practice sensible precautions. And that's where we're headed towards anyway. We're headed towards that at the probably the end of April, unless things really spike up. And we need to open the country. Trump, again, called it right. We can't let the cure be worse than the disease. The cure being quarantine. We can't let that destroy the economy because more people could die as a result of a Great Depression if we end up in a Great Depression. Now, I happen to think we won't. It's a little hard to predict. It's not 100%. That's just my feeling on it. The reason I think we won't is I think a lot of businesses will go right back into producing stuff, as quickly as they can the moment things get sort of unlocked. And I think they'll do that in tiers. There will be a bunch of businesses initially that are very hard hit. I mean, a lot of restaurants are just going to go out of business, sadly. It's going to be tough for them. The ones that have survived during the lockdown, they're going to go through a tough time too, because even though they were probably doing a brisk business doing takeout, when people go to restaurants, especially if they go to ones over and over and over again, after a while they go, well, I'm kind of sick of that place. So For instance, if you've been going to your favorite Chinese takeout again and again and again, getting food, and then you suddenly go, "Whoa, well, we're free," you're probably not going to eat at that place for a while. You're certainly not going to go into the restaurant end of it if you've been ordering from a restaurant. It's just the way it is. Um, some more evidence. There's another video online. A guy on a bus in Philadelphia was dragged off by police officers because he doesn't have a mask and gloves. And this is going to start to become more and more common. You didn't mask up, you didn't put on gloves, so now the state's going to force you to do it. I think this is a bad idea for a variety of reasons. I think private businesses should refuse entry to people who don't wear masks and gloves. That's just my personal opinion. If I had a business, I would put up a big sign that says, please have a mask and gloves. And then, maybe I'd have some for customers if I could afford to get some. But that would probably be a dumb idea, in that eventually all that would go away. Depending on the business. I mean, that's part of it too. It depends on the business. Depends on the interaction you have with people. Some business, you don't have that much interaction with people. So it's a tough call. But I think in the case of the guy on the bus, I don't like the idea of the cops dragging him off. Now, if the bus driver doesn't want the guy on board, that's a different story. Because the bus driver is kind of the captain of the ship, right? I mean, you certainly wouldn't say anything to a bus driver who kicked somebody off who tried to grab the wheel while the bus was moving, or said, step on it, and then tried to step on the gas pedal while he was driving. Nobody would have a problem with that, kicking a guy like that off. He is responsible for the safety of his passengers. So saying to a guy, hey, you don't have a mask, you can't come on the bus. And this may very well be the case in the video in Philadelphia. It may be the case that the bus driver saw this guy, said, please, sir, you have to get off the bus. You need a mask and gloves. And the guy said, F you, I'm getting on the bus anyway. And then he called the cops. Who knows? You have to take things with a grain of salt when you see them on Twitter. People are now starting to get caught up on the authoritarianism that is coming along with this lockdown. And there is some to be worried about, because you have to keep in mind these authoritarians are sitting in the wings and just waiting for moments like this. They did it during 9/11, and people on the left side of politics were like, hey, you grabbed power, that's bad. And then, the moment a Democrat gets elected, they're like, well, I'm sure everything's fine. It doesn't matter what party you're in. There are authoritarians. There are authoritarian left and authoritarian right. And they will grab power whenever they can. And they don't really care about people. So it's up to people who are sensible, let's say, who think about things like liberty and the Constitution, to point these things out. So when you see a protester like that guy in Ohio, even though he looks a little weird, he does have a point. And to, bash him on Twitter, and one of the guys bashing him, I won't say who he is, but he is one of the elites in the world of comics. He's making good money. He works at home. He's got a good business. He's probably got plenty of money. So for him to make fun of this guy, I felt that was punching down quite a bit. He's an elitist. And, he should probably think twice about that, because he'd be the first guy screaming about it. If, for instance, Trump did crack down on a federal level, which I'm glad he's not. Trump, for the most part, has been handling this okay. Some people say he had kind of a slow response in the beginning. Look, what are you supposed to do when you don't know this stuff? You didn't know. This happened a bunch of times before, and it just went away. SARS, bird flu, a couple others, and just went away. It just burned itself out. the only thing worse than shutting down the country during a disease would be shutting it down and then the disease not even hitting. So imagine he had shut down, even if he had just shut down the flights to China and there were only 10 cases in the United States. Well, he'd look like an idiot, and the press would have had a field day with it. Not to mention, not that I'm defending his political career, but it also would have cost the United States billions of dollars because he overreacted. So it's a fine line to react just the right amount, and most people are going to complain on both sides no matter what you do. There's going to be people complain, oh, you overreacted, and people you complained that you underreacted. So far, I think Trump's about as close as you're going to get, as close as any human being could get, really. When you think about all the variables in mind, this is about as close as you can get. Part of it is he just doesn't want the responsibility of locking down the entire country. He spread it out amongst the governors, and I think that's a smarter way to do this, considering how the virus has spread. It's spread in different places at different times, and then you could have a more tiered response. So, I mean, I think that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So, but we need to be vigilant in the course here that some of this stuff doesn't become permanent. This lockdown for people who want to celebrate Easter. I'm against that. I think it'd be perfectly reasonable to go to these church leaders and say, hey, listen, we don't want to tell you what to do, but we want you to take precautions with your congregation. We want you to social distance and have everybody wear a mask. Are you going to abide by that? Because we need to know. At least you can approach it like that. And if they say, yes, we want to abide that, we want to keep everybody safe, we're fine, we're open to that. I think most of them would. Yeah, there might be a handful of religious zealots to say, oh, no, Jesus will protect us. But you have to treat everybody fairly, and you cannot infringe upon somebody's religion. Because, look, I'm not a Christian, I'm an agnostic, I'm not a religious guy, but the fact that the cracking down on Christians and no other religion, there's a bunch of other religions that celebrate all kinds of stuff, and no one's cracking down on them, and no one's saying anything about it, because it's very trendy amongst the media elite here to crack down on Christians because they're fine. No, you can make fun of Christians all day long. Any other religion, you're a total, a phobe, whatever a phobe you want to attribute that to. So if you're going to treat people equally, treat them equally. If you're going to shut down one religious service, you have to shut them all down. And since you're not doing that, and since that's unconstitutional, and since I believe you shouldn't do that, what you should then do is go to religious leaders and say, hey, listen, there's a very terrible pandemic. Please, during that pandemic, will you initiate social distancing? And I think if you treat these religious leaders with some amount of respect and approach them and say, we understand there's a holiday, we want to help you, I think they'd be more than willing to say, okay, yeah, we can do that, and we can accommodate this. We can hold services outside. We can, issue some extra police officers to help, do traffic and whatnot, and work with people is what I'm saying. If you work with people, most people are reasonable. Now, are there some unreasonable people who are going to ask all kinds of crazy things? Unfortunately, yes. And we could get in what to do about that. Now, under a more libertarian society, we would just let people do what they want and take the responsibilities for their horrible actions. So if you had a congregation of people who didn't vaccinate and believed that God was going to cure them and that, they were all sick and they refused any help, well, in a libertarian society, we'd be like, well, okay, guess you all want to die. If any of you don't want to die, let us know. But, otherwise we'll be back to clean out the bodies when you're all dead. That would be sort of a response, rather than attempting to force these people to live because, keep in mind, these people are genuinely religious. They believe that their soul is more important than their body. So you don't want a situation where they get a bunch of guns and shoot at you. I think, look, if people want to die, people want to commit suicide, you shouldn't stop them. Now, if there are children involved, it becomes a whole complicated mess that we can discuss. But I think, with grown adults, they're choosing what they're choosing. They want to take that risk. Take that risk. And you don't know. You don't know what's going to happen. These people could all get sick and develop immunity to it first. And they could see that as the hand of God, and that could be fine. But, it is what it is. You either believe in freedom or you don't. And if you believe in freedom, you have to tolerate people who are going to make really, really stupid choices, even in the middle of a pandemic. And then you have to allow them to take the consequences of those choices by basically saying, well, you can't get into that hospital. We're out of resources. We're out of beds. And you should have listened to us in the pandemic. Because I think if you did that, in the long term, people would look back on that and go, when the next crisis comes around, they'd go, well, I had some relatives who were in that congregation, and a lot of them died. I think we should listen to them this time. And then people will go, yeah, you're probably right. And I think that's how people learn. They learn by sort of taking the consequences, taking their lumps, and then sort of rebuilding from there. Because it's a way of teaching people. Even though it's a rough way, it's a way. Anyhow, that's my hot take.